Hello and welcome to this edition of the France 24 interview. I'm Jessica Le Masurier and I'm joined today by Pulitzer-prize winning investigative journalist David Cay Johnston. Thanks for being with us, David.
Well, thank you, Jessica.
David, you've just released your book called The Making of Donald Trump, and you've described it as containing everything that Donald Trump does not want us to know.
Well, everything I could get into that many pages, yes.
So tell us, what does he not want us to know?
Well, Donald, first and foremost, doesn't want you to know that throughout his entire career, he has made money through his associations with con artists, a major drug trafficker, swindlers, American traditional mafia from Italy, Russian mobsters, and just a whole host of unsavory characters whom he's embraced and who have furthered his career. Secondly, he doesn't want you to know about his unbelievable cruelty to others and his utter contempt for Christians, even as he goes around saying, no one reads the Bible more than Donald Trump. And finally, that Donald doesn't know anything. My law and graduate business students at Syracuse University can answer questions like this, that Donald, when asked about him under oath, his answers are gibberish because he doesn't know anything.
There's a lot in this book. Can we start, please, with the information that you have that connects Donald Trump to the Mafia? Tell us what proof you found.
Well, Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump, had a business partner in the 40s and 50s and 60s named Willie Tomasello, who was identified by the New York State Organized Crime Task Force and other law enforcement reports as an associate of the Genovese and Gambino crime families. Those are the two biggest and most powerful mafia families in New York. And he was a source, Willie Tomasello, of capital and cash when Fred Trump needed it. Donald, early in his career, right after he graduated from college, made friends with the notorious lawyer Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was the lawyer for Senator Joseph McCarthy in the witch hunt era. McCarthy, who went around saying, I have a list here with 248 communists in the this or that government agency, which was all nonsense. He didn't have any such lists. And Roy Cohn was also the lawyer for the heads of the Gambino and Genovese crime families. When Donald built his buildings in New York, including his signature building, Trump Tower, he was able to use non-union and union labor at the same site, which normally would cause the union people to walk off. When there was a cement strike, every project in New York shut down except Trump Tower. And that tells you that Donald was in tight with these mobsters because they controlled the unions and in turn were able to make sure that Donald's projects went well. And one of his projects is actually cited in a major racketeering case in which the head of the Gambino family went to prison for life.
Actually, the story of how Trump Tower was built is very interesting. You tell that story. Can you explain why it's so fascinating, considering the fact that Donald Trump is constantly complaining about illegal immigrants?
Well, to build Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue in New York, Donald had to tear down the Bonwit Teller department store. It had these two beautiful bas-relief sculptures on the front, semi-naked women looking like they're dancing, and a huge, beautiful grillwork that looked like a giant piece of architectural, it's a gem. And Donald destroyed these because he has no cultural aesthetic. Then to take the building down, he hired about 150 Polish men through a contractor who were in the country illegally and didn't have work papers. They were paid $4 to $5 an hour when union workers would have made $15, $16 an hour plus fringe benefits. They had no hard hats. They were dealing with asbestos, but they had no face masks. They didn't have power equipment, so they took this 12-story building down with sledgehammers by hand. Donald, when he was sued later for having cheated these workers out of their measly $4 an hour, testified in a federal trial, I had no idea. And the judge said, that's not plausible. You had an office across the street with a picture window view of it. You went to the site repeatedly, and the Polish workers, they were the only people on the site without hard hats. You couldn't have missed them. And Donald was ordered to pay at least part of the money that these people were cheated out of.
When he decides to seek vengeance, he really takes it all the way, doesn't he? You devote almost an entire chapter to that, and to the fact that he punished, essentially, his nephew's baby.
So Donald's father died, one of the wealthiest men in New York, and when they read the will, it turned out that the 4 surviving Trump children got all the money, and the line of Fred Trump Jr. was essentially cut out of the will. Surprise, surprise, they filed a lawsuit suggesting undue influence so that they would not get any of the money. When that happened, Donald immediately cut off the medical care for the family. Now, the Trump family has always provided everyone with very good medical care through the company business. Donald knew when he did this that his nephew, Fred Trump III's child, was terribly sickly, nearly died a number of times, had run up huge medical bills, and that this put the life of that child in jeopardy. And he was asked at the time, why are you doing this? And he said, well, he sued my father. I don't have any choice. Well, don't you think this will look cold-hearted? He didn't care. He had no regard for the life of this child. That is, given a choice between this child's welfare and money, Donald Trump chose money.
Donald Trump's very interested in money. You are actually an expert in tax law. Right. And you describe in your book, essentially, you suggest that Donald Trump has most probably committed tax fraud. There's been a lot of controversy here in the United States over the fact that he's refusing to release his tax returns. What do you base those allegations that he's probably committed tax fraud on?
Well, the single most important and revealing thing about his tax returns is that in 1984, which was the biggest year in Donald Trump's life to that point, he was getting all the money from Trump Tower, which had just opened. His first casino in Atlantic City had just opened. So money is just flowing towards him in Amazon-like amounts. He filed what's called a Schedule C. It's what a business consultant or a freelance writer or lecturer like me would file. And he showed zero income and over $600,000 of expenses. Well, the auditors for New York State and New York City, and maybe the federal government, we don't know, but New York State and New York City challenged this and said, we'd like to see documentation and an explanation of why you had no income but you had expenses. Donald couldn't provide any. He then ordered his longtime tax guy, a lawyer and CPA, to challenge. So there were trials held. And in one of these trials, the tax return was shown to this tax guy, and he went, that's my signature, but I didn't prepare that document. That's pretty good evidence of tax fraud.
A huge part of Donald Trump's appeal to the American people is the fact that he is supposedly a very successful businessman. But you say that actually he has been right on the verge of bankruptcy.
Well, Donald's casino company went through 4 bankruptcies while he controlled it. He got money each time in these bankruptcies while vendors and workers were cheated out of money or weren't paid. After he was paid to go away, there were 2 more bankruptcies, and now the company is closing its last casino in America. Donald was examined along with about 495 other publicly traded companies by Fortune magazine, which is a very prominent business magazine in America. And by every metric that they measured, Trump casinos came in either dead last or almost at the very bottom of the list. You know, quality of management, use of assets owned by the shareholders, et cetera. Absolutely terrible record. Donald's casinos were always terribly managed. And when I was covering him in the casino industry 25 years ago, I wrote a lot about how other companies were making terrific profits and doing very well, and Donald was struggling because what Donald knows how to do is to extract money from something. He doesn't know how to run an enterprise. He didn't even understand the gambling games.
So what sort of president do you think Donald Trump would be?
We live in the Second American Republic, and we will survive a Trump presidency, but it would be a nightmare. If you're a senior military officer, you have to be thinking about what you're going to do when you're issued unlawful orders. Donald Trump says he will have people tortured. It's against the law. It's a crime to follow such orders. He has talked bizarrely about using nuclear weapons in Europe. He has advanced what appears to be the #1 foreign policy objective of Vladimir Putin, which is breaking up NATO. And so he would be a nightmare for the military. particularly if he decides he wants to do something with nuclear weapons, which I show in the book. He has not the vaguest notion of what they are, what deterrence is, anything. Secondly, I'm sure that he will try to use the government to go after people like me, and if he does, he does, and I'll have to deal with that.
What do you think is the appeal of Donald Trump? How do you explain that someone, as you say, allegedly with connections to the Mafia, who's not really such a successful businessman after all, how do you explain the way he's essentially sold himself to the American people? What's his appeal?
Jessica, this is a very odd place for me. I am the person, probably more than anybody else, who has made inequality of income and wealth an issue in America. I was writing about it more than 20 years ago when virtually no one else was. And Donald has appealed to the people I've been writing about, trying to show them, here's how government policy is taking from you and giving to rich people. These are not people who read my books, however. And Donald has provided these people, as all demagogues do, with a simple explanation. You know, it's the Mexicans, it's the Muslims, it's the idiots who don't know what they're doing in Washington. So that's an essential element of his appeal to people who are in real economic pain and terror, because in America, we don't have a safety net. You know, most people who get fired from their job, they're not even eligible to get unemployment benefits, and we've eliminated almost all welfare programs. The second element, though, is Donald's racist appeal. There is absolutely no mistaking that the core of his appeal is we want to have a white Christian America. And all of the people who think that, even if they don't say it publicly, are with him. When Donald announced that he was running this time, and he's been talking about running for president since 1985, and he's run several times in the past, something very curious happened. He comes down the elevator at Trump Tower with his wife Melania in front of him, and he then goes into this vicious, racist, and xenophobic attack. And there are all these young people applauding, and I thought, that's very strange. Midtown Manhattan is a cosmopolitan place. It's not where you hear that kind of stuff. This isn't Philadelphia, Mississippi. Well, it turns out that the audience were actors paid $50 each, which should tell people that it's all a fraud and a con.
David Cay Johnston, thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. You've been watching the France 24 interview with me, Jessica Masurier, and investigative reporter David Cay Johnston, who has just released his book on Donald Trump.